Hi guys, welcome back to another video. So it's a quick video explaining the differences between inflation, disinflation and deflation, and it's been motivated by an article, a news article, I'll put it in the thumbnail, that said something along the lines of prices must drop now that inflation has fallen, and stuff like that just really pisses me off. I completely get the general public maybe not knowing the differences or what the figures that are getting put out into the news actually means, but for a news outlet to be able to put that as a headline when it's completely incorrect, annoys me. There's no kind of accountability there or repercussions for putting out incorrect information. Inflation, what is it? Let's always start with definition. A sustained increase in the average price level in the economy, okay? Sustained increase in the average price level in an economy. How is it measured? It's measured by a basket of goods. Now, this basket of goods is typically meant to be representative of your average consumer, so things that maybe you'd buy, and what happens is how the prices of those change over time is tracked, and if they're going up, then that's what's known as inflation. Now, what's really key to point out there is it is a basket of goods and it is meant to be representative, but you as a consumer maybe don't fit into your representative sample, and it might be that what's in those baskets of goods you don't really purchase very much, and therefore you might actually find that even though inflation's at sort of like 10% or 7%, you're not as affected by it because maybe you're not buying into those goods that are what's measuring inflation. That is possible. Anyway, it's just a basket of goods, it's a representative, and it's how that's changing over time. Now, it's meant to be a sustained increase. It's not just one-off increases. If a price of something just has a one-off increase, that does not signal necessarily that there's an inflation in the economy. Okay, so that's inflation. We all get that. There's that classic joke about looking at how Freddo's prices are changing over time to measure inflation. Fine, we've got it. So let's say inflation was around 10%, which it was not that long ago, and it then falls to 7%. Both of those numbers are positive, okay? Both of those numbers means we have inflation. Both of those numbers mean prices are rising. 7% just means those prices are rising at a slower rate than 10%. So for that article to say now inflation has fallen, we'd expect prices to fall, is completely incorrect. Prices are still rising, they're just rising at a slower rate, okay? So even if 7 comes down to 2%, which is the Bank of England's target, I'll go on to more about that in a minute, prices are still rising. We still have inflation, they're just rising at a slower rate. And that's what's known as disinflation. So inflation, you've got the increasing. Disinflation, you still have increasing, but at a slower rate. The fact it still has the word inflation in there should be a really good clue. And then the last one is deflation. So what that kind of like article heading was getting at is you would think there was deflation if prices are falling. So deflation, also sometimes called negative inflation. So inflation has gone below 0%. That is when your prices are falling. And deflation can actually be really catastrophic for an economy. Basically, consumers tend to massively put off spending because they're hoping that prices are going to fall further. And then we can get what's known as like stagnation in the economy. And that's typically why the Bank of England has set a 2% target and not like a 0% target or a negative target. There's that 2% inflation target. So let's just quickly recap that. We've got inflation, which you know about. We've got your disinflation, which is still inflation. Prices are still rising, but at a slower rate than before. And you've got your deflation, which is prices are falling because it's negative inflation. So let's now talk about and unpack that all a little bit more. Okay, so inflation, we've got a cost of living crisis, and that's why you keep hearing this word. Why is it that we're hearing about it a lot? Why is it making such big news? Now, you might be thinking it's because it's really damaging in the sense of your purchasing power has been affected and maybe you're struggling to afford things now. Well, one of the reasons is the Bank of England, the central bank, their main objective is price stability. They have a price stability mandate. So they're what's known as inflation targeters, and they target to get inflation hitting around 2%. I said before, we don't want it to go negative. That's typically why they're aiming for around 2%. And central bank, in order to be able to work, in order to be able to what's known as anchor inflation expectations, I'm going to do a whole video on inflation expectations because they're super important and you've probably heard about them a lot if you're doing an economics degree. in order to be able to anchor them, they need to know what's something that's known as transparency and accountability. So what's happening is every time they miss that 2% target by a certain amount above and below, they have to write this letter explaining that they've missed it and what they're doing to rectify it. Because that reassures people in the economy that the central bank are still putting price stability as their main objective. Now, in the UK, what typically tends to happen is the way we try and sort of control inflation is we use an indirect instrument, and it's known as the base rate. So you've been hearing about this. The base rate has been getting risen. So what is it now? It's something like 5%, right? And what that is you might think, well, hang on a minute, there's so many rates in the economy, and there are, but your base rate is the one that all the other rates tend to follow on from. So if the base rate rises, what you'd hope to see is something known as an interest rate transmission mechanism, and you should see other rates in the economy also start to rise. So this is why people that have mortgages now are starting to panic, because they're seeing the interest rate on their mortgages rise. Hopefully, people with savings accounts such as ISAs, I don't know about you, but I have, that's also risen. So we're seeing that savers, the interest rates for them have also risen. And this is all because the Bank of England or the Monetary Policy Committee, they meet and they've decided to raise the base rate. Back in the day, it didn't used to be very good, but if you go on the Bank of England website, they're now actually quite good at putting out informative information in a really accessible and friendly way. So I really recommend that if you want to learn more about this, that you go onto the Bank of England's website. So I hope that was really helpful. I hope now that you can very quickly know the difference between deflation and disinflation, and that you know what to expect when you start to see that inflation figure falling. Bye guys.